I've been looking forward to this. Let's talk about Enicar, the sleeping giant of the vintage watch world you maybe never heard of before, but which continuously cultivated a die-hard fan base over the last decades. And within what used to be only a fantasy to me personally, there's also a unicorn hidden or two. So without further ado, let's have a look at possibly one of the only few remaining orange Enicar Sherpa star divers out there on the Time Worn channel. Researching this watch was both very difficult and super easy compared to other 50-plus-year-old watches. On the one hand, this specific piece and dial variation seems to be very rare, and on the other hand, there is an amazing book out there based on the research by Martin van der Ven into Enicar's history. So I'll give you only a short detour about what made and still makes Enicar such an interesting part of horology. Everything starts with the name itself, Enicar. In reverse, you'll get the name Razin, Arist Razin to be precise, and his wife and watch technician Emma Blood were the founders. They had to come up with an alternative name since Razin was already taken as a trademark by another family member, Jules Razin Sr., who was active in the watch world as well. The couple started out their business in La Chaux-de-Fonds in 1913, before moving into Enicar's most prominent home in Lengnau, Switzerland, 6 years later. Since 1934, they produced their own movements and became immensely successful worldwide. Aside from producing great watches, Arist and his son were known to be excellent salesmen, which also manifested itself in their marketing campaigns. Just to give you the most prominent examples, the Sherpa series was part of a Swiss expedition up Mount Everest in the second successful ascent in 1956. The ascent of the Enicar watches transformed Sherpa into an attribute for sturdy watches even under harsh conditions. Therefore, many submodel lines of Sherpas came out in the following 2 decades. Another punchy marketing stunt in 1957 involved strapping an ultrasonic Sherpa to a replica of the original Mayflower, which went on to sail across the Atlantic Ocean with the timepiece on its rudder submerged in water. The watch's accuracy reportedly remained unscathed by that trip. Impressive marketing. And it helped that famous Enicar ambassadors were won over, like racing legends Jim Clark and Sterling Moss, starting in the early 60s with their Sherpa Graph Mark Is, or Gerhard Mitter in the late 60s, and many more. Other athletes in diving, of course, but also tennis, cycling, and also, for example, Olympic rifle shooting were supplied with iconic Enicar pieces. Football was of course part of that list as well, and Brazilian player legend Pelé owned a beautiful F45 Big Eye at some point, since it was part of an auction of his belongings. Quite the list, don't you agree? The timeline I presented is by no means complete, since, for example, Enicar also played a big role in supplying troops during the 2 world wars and had an interesting export history in Asian markets later on. So if you wish to know more, I can only direct you towards the Enicar book, not sponsored, which presents the story in its entirety and in more detail than I ever could. The watch right here was part of the Sherpa Star line, which started in 1965 and actually represented the high end of its lineup above the other Sherpa models, and usually featured a more dressy approach. You can already see the similarities to this star diver with the basin-shaped dial. But residing within the Sherpa Star line made the Star Diver not only the most expensive timepiece at retail back then, but also the funkiest and standout piece by Enicar in my opinion. If you're wondering what happened with Enicar as a brand, the Enicar SA in Lengnau filed for liquidation in 1981 after gradually losing the battle against the quartz crisis, and the brand was sold off in 1987. The name is still being used by a Hong Kong-based company, which offers mostly quartz watches on the Asian market. Aside from that, I would like to mention that the spirit of Enicar lives on, particularly the design of the Sherpa Ultra Dive and OPS models were revived by Martin Klocke in Germany under the newly formed Sherpa brand in 2021. Something worth checking out if you're a fan of modern reinterpretations of vintage watches. Let's have a more detailed look at this pumpkin-colored rarity, shall we? I am a fan of the tonneau shape, and this watch perfected this type of case geometry with a circular brushing on top and beveled sides. It's large at 43mm in diameter and 45mm from lug to lug, but nicely curved. What does stand out from the sleek optics is the unidirectional bezel. It was jokingly called the cuff ripper by a fellow collector online, and I think that pretty much sums it up perfectly. The edges are sharp, easy to grab that way even if you wear, for example, some diving gloves, but boy can they hurt as well. there is a slightly more curved bezel version, which can be identified via the reference number, ending on 01 for the more curved or 02 for the cuff ripper nicknamed 1. Looking at the profile, I would rather call this one the crown of all bezels. Wouldn't you agree? The watch, including the domed mineral crystal, is 13 mm in height and weighs 123 grams on this original bracelet, tapering down from 20 mm lug width towards 16.5 mm at the sign folding clasp. The Stardiver is also one of the only Anycars with a screw-down crown, also featuring the Saturn logo on it, as expected. As already mentioned with the bezel, there were a few variations of the Stardiver, for example, a PVD coated one, which is also very rare to find in a great condition, and even rarer variants had a totally different bezel. For example, there was a fixed tachymeter bezel out there. Now, if you look for Stardivers, you will almost exclusively find ones with a black dial. So, in line with my unicorn analogy from the beginning, you have every right to ask about the authenticity of this orange peel. And that is impossible to answer for sure, since the registers of the Anycar headquarters were almost completely destroyed when the company was finally sold off in 1987. What remains are hints towards various prototypes of dial and handset variations, etc. And Anycar was also known for being highly experimental in a time when the orange dial has already made other watches particularly famous. Looking at you, Doxa and Jacques Cousteau. One page from the Europa Star magazine 1974, which is unfortunately monochrome, undoubtedly shows a version of the Stardiver with a very bright dial in contrast to the typical black one, with a different set of hand colors. The latter were found to have actually existed as replacement parts. Additionally, the date disc is dark as well on this catalog and my one, while the typical ones have the date in black font on a white background. All but circumstantial evidence for this particular combination I have right here. So what is there left to say? I got it from a highly reputable dealer, and it is perfect for me the way it is, even without that last piece of certainty. Aside the color, the Stardiver in general is highly unusual, considering its deep pipe hand shape with the markers set upon the dial to protrude from the outside in. Additionally, the position of the trapezoidal cutout for the date into the Rehaute at 12 o'clock and the day at 6 o'clock already generate a unique look. Going further, this highly symmetrical look is broken up by the layout for the brand and model name. The Stardiver was also special since it did not feature the Saturn logo on the dial itself, but rather the Anycar lettering. Now the hands are also obviously distinctive in shape. The hour hand in particular reminded me a little bit of the famous snowflake hands by Tudor. Another Stardiver specialty is the caseback. Here Anycar went out of their usual MO for divers and did not include an EPSA Super compressor caseback, but rather a simple screw-in one. On it you can find the beautiful sea pearl relief and a small Saturn as well. Inside, the in-house developed AR167 automatic movement does its job nicely at 21,600 amplitudes per hour, resting on 24 joules with a power reserve of 45 hours. The quick setting of the date works by repeatedly pulling and pushing of the crown, another quite unique trait. Price-wise, Anycars in general were deemed highly collectible already from the 90s onwards, which makes things a bit tough on the wallet today. Interestingly, what used to be the most expensive model back then in the late 60s and 70s, the Anycar Stardiver, is now cheaper than, for example, a vintage Sherpa Graph. The more common, black dial Stardivers are around 3,000 to 4,000 euros in 2022. I'm still honeymooning with this watch, could you tell? Anycar grew on me quickly, and even more so the more I found out about its history. It still remains a sleeping giant for most watch enthusiasts, as it is strictly confined to the vintage era of watch collecting. But it is for that very reason that the name cannot be brought up often enough, since the designs and technical aspects of most Anycars easily equal and even succeed those of so many contemporary watches, which in contrast seemingly receive all the attention today. Hope you enjoyed this one, and I'm always thrilled to receive some feedback. See you in the next one on the Time Worn channel.